Chapter 2 is called The Door is Shut. Omri got dressed in a state of such high excitement that he could scarcely control his fumbling fingers enough to do up his buttons and tie his shoelaces. He thought he was excited yesterday on his birthday, but it was nothing compared to how he felt now. He was dying to open the cupboard door and have another look, but the landing outside his bedroom door was like a railway station at this hour of the morning, parents and brothers passing continually, and if he were to close his door for a moment's privacy, somebody would be sure to burst in. He'd nip in after breakfast and have a quick look when he was supposed to be cleaning his teeth. However, that didn't work out. There was a stupid fight at the breakfast table because Adiel took the last of the Rice Krispies, and although there were plenty of cornflakes, not to mention sugar puffs, the other two fairly set upon Adiel and made such an awful fuss that their mother lost her temper, and in the end, nobody got to even clean their teeth afterwards. They were all bundled out to the house at the last minute, and Omri even forgot to take his swimming things, although it was Thursday, the day his class went to the pool. He was an excellent swimmer, and he was so annoyed when he remembered halfway to school it was too late to go back. Then he turned on Adiel and shouted, "You made me forget my swimming stuff," and bashed him, and this naturally led them all to being late for school and furthermore arriving in a very grubby condition. All this actually pushed the Indian right out of Omri's mind, but the minute he set eyes on Patrick, he remembered. And not for one single second for the rest of the day was that Indian out of Omri's thoughts. You may imagine the temptation to tell Patrick what had happened, and several times Omri very nearly did tell him, and he couldn't help dropping a number of tantalizing hints. "Your present was the best thing I got." Patrick looked rather astonished. "I thought you said you got a skateboard." "Yeah, but I like yours better." "Better than a skateboard? Are you kidding me?" "Yours turned out to be more exciting." Patrick just stared at him. "Are you being sarcastic?" "No." Later, after they'd all had the spelling test and Omri had been marked 3 right out of 10, Patrick joked, "I bet the plastic Indian could have done better." 3 out of 10, right? That'd be a F, right? 30%. Unwaringly, Omri replied, "Oh, I don't think he can write English. He can only speak." He stopped himself quickly, but Patrick was giving him a very odd look. "What?" "Nothing." "No, what did you just say about him speaking?" Omri wrestled with himself. He wanted to keep his secret. In any case, Patrick wouldn't believe him, yet the need to talk about it was very strong. "He can speak," he said slowly, at last. "Beard," said Patrick, which was their school slang for "I don't believe you." Instead of insisting, Omri said nothing more, and that led Patrick to ask, "Why did you just say that about him speaking?" "'Cause he does." "Itchy beard," which of course means the same, only more so. Omri refused to get in an argument. He was somehow scared that if he talked about the Indian, something bad would happen. In fact, as the day went on and he longed more and more to get home, he began to feel certain that the whole incredible happening, well, not that it hadn't happened, but that something would go wrong. All his thoughts, all his dreams were centered on the miraculous, endless possibilities opened up by a real, live miniature Indian of his very own. It would be too terrible if the whole thing turned out to be some sort of mistake. And after school, Omri wanted him to stay at the after school, Patrick wanted Omri to stay at the school grounds and skateboard for weeks. Omri had longed to do this, but he had never had his own skateboard till now, so it was quite beyond Patrick's understanding when Omri said, "I can't. I have to go home. Anyway, I didn't bring it." "Why not? Are you crazy? Why do you have to get home anyway?" "I want to play with the Indian." Patrick's eyes narrowed in disbelief. "Can I come?" Omri hesitated, but no, it wouldn't do. He just must get to know the Indian himself before he even thought of introducing him to anyone else, even Patrick. Besides, the most awful thought had come to Omri during the last lesson, which had made it almost impossible for him to sit still. If the Indian were real, and not just, well, moving plastic, as Pinocchio had been moving wood, then he would need food and other things, and Omri had left him shut up in the dark all day with nothing. Perhaps, what if there was not enough air for him in that cupboard? The door fit very tightly. How much air would there be for such a small creature? And what if the Indian what if he died shut up in there and Omri had killed him? At the very best, the Indian must have passed a horrible day in a dark prison. Omri was appalled at the thought of it. Why had he allowed himself to be drawn into that silly fight at breakfast instead of slipping away and making sure the Indian was all right? The mere thought that he might be dead was frightening Omri sick. He ran all the way home, burst through the back door, and raced up the stairs without even saying hello to his mother. He shut the door of his bedroom and fell to his knees beside the bedside table. With a hand that shook, he turned the key in the lock and opened the cupboard door. And the Indian lay there on the floor of the cupboard, stiff and stark. Too stiff. This was not a dead body. Omri picked it up. It was as if it was a it and not a he anymore. The Indian was made of plastic again. Omri knelt there appalled, too appalled to move. He had killed his Indian or done something awful to him, and at the same time he had killed his dream, all the wonderful, exciting secret games that had filled his imaginations all day. But that was not the main horror. His Indian had been real, not a mere toy, but a person, and now he lay there in Omri's hand, cold, stiff, and lifeless, somehow through Omri's own fault. How had it happened? It had never occurred to Omri now that he had imagined the whole incredible episode this morning. The Indian had been in a completely different position from the one he'd been in when Patrick had gave him to Omri. Then he'd been standing on one leg, as if doing a war dance, knees bent, one moccasin foot raised, both elbows bent with one fist, with the knife in it in the air. But now he lay flat, legs apart, arms at his sides. His eyes were closed. The knife was no longer a part of him. It lay separately on the floor of the cupboard. Omri picked it up. The easiest way to do this, he found, was to wet his finger and press it down on the tiny knife, which stuck to it. It, too, was plastic, and it could have no more of pierced human skin than a twist of paper. So remember, it had made blood on Omri, right, when he had pierced his skin, but now it's made of plastic and it bends. Isn't that strange? And now the Indian is plastic again, but not in the same position that he was in when Omri got him from Patrick. It, too, was plastic. Yet it had pierced Omri's finger this morning. The little mark was still there, and this morning it had been a real knife. Omri stroked the Indian with his finger. There was a painful thickness in the back of his throat. The pain of sadness, disappointment, and a strange sort of guilt burned inside of him as if he had swallowed a very hot potato that wouldn't cool down. And he let the tears come, and he just knelt there and cried for about 10 minutes. And then he put the Indian back in the cupboard and locked the door because he could not bear to look at him any longer. And that night at supper he couldn't eat anything, and he couldn't talk, and his father touched Omri's face and said it felt very hot. And his mother took him upstairs and put him to bed, and oddly enough, he didn't even object. He didn't know if he was ill or not, but he felt so bad he was quite glad to be made a fuss of. Not that that improved the basic situation, but it was some comfort. "What is it, Omri? Tell me," coaxed his mother. She stroked his hair and looked at him very tenderly and questioningly, and he nearly told her everything, but then he suddenly rolled over on his face. "Nothing really." She sighed and kissed him, or rather the back of him, and left the room, closing the door softly after her. As soon as she had gone, he heard something, a scratching or a muttering, definitely a live sound, and it was coming from the cupboard. And Omri snapped his bedside light on and stared wide-eyed at his own face in the mirror of the cupboard door. He stared at the key with its twisted ribbon, and he listened to the sounds now unmistakable. He tremblingly turned the key, and there was the live Indian, on the shelf, almost exactly level with Omri's face, alive again. And again they stared at each other, and then Omri said falteringly, "What happened to you?" "Happen? Good sleep happen. Cold ground, need blanket, food, fire." Omri gaped. Was the little man giving him orders? Undoubtedly he was, because he waved his knife, now back in his hand, in an unmistakable way. Omri was so happy he could scarcely speak. "Okay, you stay there. I'll get food. Don't worry." And he gasped as he scrambled out of bed. He hurried downstairs, excited but thoughtful. What could it all mean? That the moment the cupboard door closed, the Indian went to sleep? It was puzzling, but he didn't bother worrying about it too much. His main concern was to get downstairs without his parents hearing him, get to the kitchen, find some food that would suit the Indian, and bring it back without anyone asking questions. Fortunately, his parents were in the living room watching television, so he was able to tiptoe to the kitchen along the dark passage. And once there, he dared not turn on a light, but there was a refrigerator light, and that was enough. He surveyed the inside of the refrigerator. What did Indians eat? Meat, chiefly, he supposed. Deer, meat, rabbits, the sort of animals that they could shoot on their land. Needless to say, there was nothing of that sort. Biscuits, jam, peanut butter, that sort of thing was no problem, but somehow Omri felt sure these were not Indian foods. Suddenly his searching eyes fell upon an open tin of sweet corn. He found a paper plate in the drawer where the picnic stuff lived and took a good teaspoonful of corn. Then he broke off a crusty corner of bread. Then he thought of some cheese, and what about a drink? Milk? Surely Indian braves did not drink milk. They usually drank something called fire water in films, which was presumably a hot drink, and Omri dared not heed anything. Ordinary non-fire water would have to do unless... What about some Coke? That was an American drink. Luckily, there was a bit of a big bottle left over from his birthday, so he took that, and he did wish there was some cold meat, but there just wasn't any. Clutching the Coke bottle by the neck with one hand and a paper plate in the other, Omri sneaked back upstairs with a fast-beating heart. All was just as he had left it, except that the Indian was sitting at the edge of the shelf, dangling his legs, and trying to sharpen his knife on the metal. He jumped up as soon as he saw Omri. Food? He said eagerly. Yeah, but I don't know if it's what you like. I like. Give quick. But Omri wanted to arrange things a little, so he took a pair of scissors and cut a small circle out of the paper plate. And on this he put a crumb of bread, another of cheese, and one kernel of sweet corn. He handed this offering to the Indian, who backed off, looking at the food with hungry eyes, but trying to keep watch on Omri just at the same time. Not touch. You touch, I use knife, he warned. All right, I promise not to. Now you can eat. Very cautiously, the Indian sat down, this time cross-legged on the shelf. And at first he tried to eat with his left hand, keeping the knife at the ready on his right, but he was so hungry, he soon abandoned this effort and laid the knife close to his side and grabbed the bread in one hand and a little crumb of cheese in the other. And he began to tear at them ravenously. When these two apparently familiar foods had taken the edge off his appetite, he turned his attention to the single kernel of corn. So think about corn. One little piece of corn is almost as big probably as the Indian's head. So he's looking at this corn like, what's going on? What? He said suspiciously. Corn like you have, Omri hesitated. Where you come from? He said. It was a shot in the dark. He didn't know if the Indian came from anywhere, but he meant to find out. The Indian grunted and turned the corn about in his both hands. It was about half as big as his head. He smelled it, and a great grin spread over his face, and he nibbled it. And the grin grew wider, but then he held it away and looked again, and the grin vanished. Too big, he said. Like you, he said accusingly. Eat it, it's the same stuff. The Indian took a bite, and he still looked very suspicious, but he ate and he ate. He couldn't finish it, but he evidently liked it. Give meat, he said finally. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't find any tonight, but I'll get you some tomorrow, said Omri. Another grunt, and the Indian said, Drink? Omri had been waiting for this. From his box, where he kept his Action Man things, he had brought a plastic mug. It was much too big for the Indian, but it was the best he could do. Into it, with extreme care, he now poured a minute, which means very small, amount of Coke from the huge bottle. He handed it to the Indian, who had to hold it with both hands and still almost dropped it. So do you think an Indian has ever had Coke or pop of any kind? No. What? He barked after smelling it. Coca-Cola? Said Omri, enthusiastically pouring some for himself in a cup. Firewater? No, it's cold, but you'll like it. The Indian sipped, swallowed, gulped. He gulped it again, and he grinned. Good? Said Omri. Good, said the Indian. Cheers, said Omri, raising his cup as he'd seen his parents do when they're having a drink together. What cheers? I don't know, said Omri, feeling excessively happy, and drank. His Indian, eating and drinking. He was real, a real flesh and blood person. It was too marvelous. Omri felt he might die of delight. Do you feel better now? He asked. I better. You not better, said the Indian. You still big. You stop eat. Get right size. Omri laughed aloud and then stopped himself hastily. It's time to sleep, he said. Not now, big light. Sleep when light go. I can make the light go, said Omri, and he switched out the bedside lamp. In the darkness came a thin cry of astonishment and fear, and Omri switched the light on again. The Indian was now gazing at him with something more than respect, a sort of awe. You great white spirit? He asked in a whisper. No, said Omri, and this isn't the sun. It's a lamp. Don't you have lamps? The Indian peered where he was pointing. That lamp? He said unbelievingly. Much big lamp, need much oil. Oh, this isn't an oil lamp. It works by electricity. Magic? No, electricity? But speaking of magic, how did you get here? The Indian looked at him steadily out of his black eyes. You not know? No, I don't. You were a toy, and then I put you in the cupboard, and I locked the door, and when I opened it, you were real. And then I locked it again, and you went back to being plastic, and then... He stopped sharply. Wait. What if, he thought furiously, it was possible, in which case... Listen, he said. I want you to come out of there. I'll find you a much more comfortable place. You said you were cold. I'll make you a proper teepee. Teepee? The Indian shouted. I no live teepee. I live longhouse. Omri was so eager to test his theory about the cupboard that he was impatient. You'll have to make do with a teepee tonight, he said. Hastily, he opened a drawer and took out a biscuit tin full of little plastic people. Somewhere in there was a plastic teepee. Ah, here. He pounced on it, a small pinkish cone-shaped object with designs rather badly painted on its plastic sides. Will this do? He put it on the shelf beside the Indian, who looked at it with the utmost scorn. This teepee? He said. So think about a teepee, right, that goes like a triangle kind of around, and it's and then you can enter through a little door. But this one's made of plastic. Think about what the Indian thinks about plastic. Like, what is that? This teepee, he said. He touched its plastic sides and made a face. He pushed at it with both hands, and it slid along the shelf, and he bent and peered in through the triangular opening, and then he actually spit on the ground, or rather on the shelf. Oh, said Omri, crestfallen, you mean it's not good enough? Not one toy, said the Indian, and turned his back, folding both arms across his chest with an air of finality. Omri saw his chance. With one quick movement, he had picked up the Indian by the waist between his thumb and forefinger. In doing this, he pinned the knife, which was in the Indian's belt, firmly to his side. The dangling Indian writhed and twisted and kicked and made a number of ferocious and hideous faces. But beyond that, he was helpless, and he evidently knew it. For after a few moments, he decided it was more dignified to stop struggling. Instead, he folded his tiny arms across his chest once again, put his head back, and stared with proud defiance in Omri's face, which was now level with his own. For Omri, the feeling of holding this little creature in his fingers was very strange and wonderful. If he had had any doubts that the Indian was truly alive, the sensation he had now would put them to rest. His body was heavier now, warm and firm and full of life. Through Omri's thumb on the Indian's left side, he could actually feel his heart wildly beating, like a bird's. And although the Indian felt strong, Omri could sense how fragile he was, how easily an extra squeeze could injure him. He would have liked to feel him all over, his tiny arms, his legs, his hair, his ears, almost too small to see. Yet when he saw how the Indian, who was altogether in his power, faced him boldly and hid his fear, he lost all desire to handle him. He felt it was cruel and insulting to the Indian, who was no longer his plaything, but a person who had to be respected. So again, is this a toy? Well, now that it's come to life, seems like it's a real live person, right? Omri put him down gently on the chest of drawers where the cupboard stood. Then he crouched down until his face was again level with the Indian's. I'm sorry I did that, he said. The Indian, breathing heavily and with his arms still folded, said nothing but stared haughtily at him as if nothing could affect him in any way. What's your name? Said Omri. Little Bear, said the Indian, pointing proudly to himself. Iroquois brave, son of chief. You son of chief? He shouted at Omri fiercely. No, said Omri humbly. Huh, said Little Bear with a superior look. Name? So Omri told him. Now we must find you another place to sleep outside the cupboard. Surely you sleep in teepees sometime? Never, said Little Bear firmly. I never heard of an Indian who didn't, said Omri with equal firmness. You'll have to deny it anyway. Not toy, said the Indian. This no good. And fire. I want fire. Well, I can't light a real fire in here, but I'll make you a teepee, and it won't be very good, but I promise you a better one tomorrow. He looked around, and it was good, he thought, that he never put anything away. And now everything he needed was strewn on the floor and on the tables and shelves ready to hand. Starting with some pickup sticks and a bit of string he made of sort of a cone shape, he tied it at the top, and around this he draped first a handkerchief, and then when that didn't seem firm enough, a bit of old felt from a hat that had been in the dressing-up crate. It was fawn-colored, fortunately, and looked rather like an animal hide. In fact, when it was pinned together at the back, with a couple of safety pins and a slit cut for the entrance, the whole thing looked pretty good, especially with the poles sticking up through the hole at the top. Omri stood up it carefully on the chest of drawers and anxiously awaited Little Bear's verdict. The Indian walked around it 3 times slowly, went down on his hands and knees and crawled in through the flap, and came out again after a minute and tugged at the felt, stood back to look at the poles, and finally he gave a fairly satisfied grunt. However, he wasn't going to pass it off without any criticism at all. No pictures, he growled. If teepee, then need pictures. Oh, I don't know how to do them, said Omri. I know. You give colors, I make. Tomorrow, said Omri, who despite himself was beginning to feel very sleepy. Blanket? Omri fished out one of Action Man's sleeping rolls. No good, no keep out wind. Omri started to object that there was no wind in the bedroom, but then he decided it was easier to cut up a square out of one of his old sweaters, so he did that. And it was a red one with a stripe around the bottom, and even Little Bear couldn't hide his approval as he held it up. And then he wrapped it around himself. Good, warm, I sleep now. He drooped on his knees and crawled into the tent, and after a moment he stuck his head out. Tomorrow, talk. You give Little Bear meat, fire, color, much things. He scowled fiercely up at Omri. Good? Good, said Omri. And indeed nothing in his life had ever promised better.